Welcome to the land of no easy answers, where sometimes your face needs a punch. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Alex Knight.
Hey, what are you saying?
I'm Alex Knight, joined by Master of Psychology, Kristin Rumohr.
Hello.
And her unwitting test subject whose face occasionally needs a punch, Aaron Stewart.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a good spot to punch. I guess I got the padding.
We're so violent
here,
today. We're so violent today.
God, your face is so punchable.
Well, we're talking about evolution, right?
We are.
And a lot of, unfortunately, the stuff of evolution, is often leading us to developing portions of our body to be better suited to, I guess, punching and taking punches.
And this all comes from an article that actually was the source of it was a biologist journal. They did an abstract on just sort of studying the evolution of humanity and why men have more body muscle mass and stuff like that. So this is kind of be the focus of this whole episode. But the Germans have
it was kind of the dimorphism for it that was kind of the
Germans have
difference between male and female.
Right, the difference between males and females. But the Germans have a word that perfectly encapsulates this whole subject, don't they, Aaron?
Sure.
Are you gonna say it? Because we just talked about that.
I know,
but just about how badly
that was just the worst segue I've ever heard for just like leading it directly to, right? Like I was hoping it would be a more natural progression of the
okay,
episode.
Fuck it. I'm gonna start all over again.
No, that wasn't what. That was the intro, was it? Oh.
You could have just forget it. I'll start over again.
Okay, I'm lost here. What did I miss here?
Well, just like interrupting the flow of this and just like I got to start over again now.
Sorry, you led it into a thing that I was not aware was happening, and you just kind of throw it into my face, going, "Just say a German word."
I was waiting for you to say.
Yeah, I know. And again, I was kind of hoping it would be more an organic part of the podcast versus you leading me into a dancing monkey routine where I get to say a word.
I just wanted that comedic aspect. I wanted the laugh at the beginning.
I get that, but again, I was trying to find the laugh. Yeah, exactly. Up until that point where you led me to a point where I was going, this isn't funny.
Save that intro and then we'll just cut all of this out.
That was exactly. And then you want to go back to the beginning and I'm like, no, what is going on here? That was perfectly fine.
I don't even know where
all
to
we
start
need to do
right
is just
now.
find a better segue.
I say we post this.
I get
Right?
that. I apologize. I completely lost it. I completely lost it. And that's totally unprofessional.
That was completely losing it? Shit, man.
I think I know why it was that way, because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been podcasting. I've been in front of a microphone for more than a decade now, and I did take a long break of, I think, at least 12 months or more, and I hadn't recorded any shows. So I felt a little bit rusty going into this show, because I do feel, I mean, it's not exactly, it's like, it's not exactly like riding a bike where you never forget. I mean, I didn't forget exactly, but you definitely, like, the edges wore off a little bit, and I still feel like I'm very self-critical. So if I feel like I'm not delivering 100%, if my delivery isn't exactly the way I want it to be, I'm very difficult on myself. So when that segue, when you were calling me out on that, and I realized that segue was kind of shitty, I fucking lost it, because I thought, well, I'm not good. I'm not good anymore. I can't do this.
The first time I've called you out in how many episodes?
I know, but it's...
I know. And that's... see, and again, I apologize. I'm sorry if that was where you went, right? Like, again, like, that wasn't what I was intending with that thing,
I know,
right? Like, it was meant to be just a little throwaway. No, and that's where, again, like, this is a meeting of, right? And it's I'm sorry for putting you there. right? Like, that's the thing. Like, we have to both agree that this was a two-way street. There was part of me that led you to there, and I'm sorry that it got to that point. But we now have a better understanding moving forward, right? And I'll now understand that you have that critical part of you that I might have to, right? And I have the same thing, man. I get critical. I'll have exactly the same response when you constructively criticize anything I do. Yeah. I will immediately get that. Fuck you! You brought it. Oh wait.
Well, sorry, it's not the first time this is.
Right?
It's not the first time this has happened.
But this is where we all are.
I had a guest on the show one time who is also a podcaster from another podcast. He was making an appearance, and I was doing I think I was doing the outro for the show, and I guess he didn't like the way that it was going. And so he started criticizing me about like, oh, that's not fucking good. Like, oh, you got to do better than that. And so I lost it. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, you're coming on my show and you're going to tell me how to deliver this. Like, no, you don't get to do that.
When I did not ask you to provide any of that service whatsoever.
Yeah. Like I take it deeply personal. Like, I just like, why are you criticizing me? Like, why are you criticizing my delivery? Like, you're a guest on my show.
Yeah.
So,
well, and this is what you do, right? Like, this is your baby, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I get it when you're, so protective over it and you want to, produce the best thing possible. So any threats to that, I totally understand.
Yeah.
Right. But we're all just human, right? We're all gonna make mistakes, and that's why we're doing this show. Is we want to show that to people.
I understand.
That are listening and watching, and so these are things that make us stronger.
Well,
right? These are the
yeah.
reasons we love you as well. Is like you can't always be perfect.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's just that
like that's it's supposed to have the rust.
Yeah. I'm also just trying to, it's a constant work in progress. There's always room to be better. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I went to school for broadcasting too, is because I wanted to work on my craft. I wanted to work on my delivery, and having some practice of being live on the radio is really nerve-wracking because you can't do this stuff. Like, you have to segue, properly. You can't have dead air. And it's a good thing that we're not live streaming this, because like, had that happened live, I would have had a fucking panic attack, because we can't just stop the show. But that's also partly me.
Crickets.
I could have just pushed past that. I could have pushed past that. And go, oh, well, fuck, I guess I fucked up.
Chirp.
I could have done that. So,
that might come with time, right? I mean, it's just when you're dealing with, you've got the two of us and we embrace all of the flaws. Actually, we live in the flaws, right? I love the gray area.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's just if you keep getting that reinforcement, it's okay to fuck up. It's okay to make mistakes. This is how we learn. Right. And like anything else, it's just eventually that'll start hopefully kind of rewiring this response that we all have, this gut reaction of, it's failed, or I need to beat myself up about it, to it's okay and just move on. To
be fair too, like, and I watch, there are a lot of broadcasters that I really look up to and really respect, and even they are not totally flawless. Like, I've seen people get into arguments live on a show because somebody didn't. Somebody was maybe being a bit more difficult, and the host of the show was like, this is not a fucking democracy, like, I'm running this kind of thing, and they got into a fucking argument live on camera, right? And sometimes that happens to the best of us too. So,
which is good TV. And again, like, my thing is, the whole point of this podcast is, how do we resolve those? We're going to have them. We're going to have those times when that back piping gets psyched is just going to be overwhelming. All right. How do you back yourself out of that situation, and how do you make it a respectful meeting after that point? When you've already gotten yourself to the point where I'm going to punch you in the face, how do you wind that? How do we get to that? How, finding the conversation in between. Right. And so that's where, again, like, that's where, the rust is supposed to be here. Right. Because this whole conversation is about the rust. It's not supposed to be polished. That's why I wanted you off script for the intro. Right? Because it's not supposed to have that polished feel to any of this. That's why I've kept all this shit around. It's just that everybody knows when they come in here that this is supposed to have, right? Like, this is supposed to be for everybody, because we're all going through this shit right now, right? Like, we all just want to punch each other in the face. And how do we fix that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Show us you're messy.
Exactly.
Right?
And so if we can, literally show on our podcast how you get around those situations by having them in real time, I am all for that.
So this article today comes to us from bigthink.com, which is discussing a abstract that was published in the Journal of Experimental Biology, which we won't get into. But basically, according to biologist David Carrier of the University of Utah, in mammals in general, the differences between male and females is often greatest in the structures that are used as weapons. Men on average have 75% more body muscle mass and 90% greater upper body strength than females. And a new study authored by Carrier suggests why. Eons of male-to-male interpersonal aggression, and more specifically punching. So we're talking about evolution. And Aaron, you mentioned something before the show started about empathy. Was it empathy for people that are aggressive, people that have a tendency to violence?
Well, a lot of what we talk on the podcast here is just, trying to find those parts of our evolutionary, progress that still might be relevant to how we react to each other on an interpersonal level here, right? The idea that most men evolved to not only throw punches but take them seems like something, again, if we're talking about like brain structures and such, right? Like, and how that might impact our general day-to-day kind of thing. If we are kind of hardwired to throw a punch, again, the idea that there must be some sort of empathy involved in being able to at least just go, okay, I get that's your natural tendency. How do we divert this? Right?
Okay.
And again, just being aware of the fact that this is something that's happening inside your brain and you may just not be aware of it, right? But due to an evolutionary trick, right, we were evolved to be able to throwing punches made us more appealing to women, basically. And so that's why we tend to, right? And if you're aware of this, that might give you some weapon to at least be able to divert these tendencies when you start to feel them occurring inside of you. Okay. And so that's where, again, it's just this awareness thing where they've done a study that actually shows that, sexual dimorphism, just men just happen to have more upper body strength. And apparently that's part of throwing punches. And our skull structure is apparently specifically designed for taking punches. And again, it just speaks to the evolution of things and how do we kind of get past that moving forward. Right. And part of that is awareness of it.
It is interesting, and this is something that we talk about every now and again too, about mindfulness. No matter what problem you have, like whether you have a drinking problem or you have whatever it is that you're fighting against, it's that first step is, like you're saying, being aware. So if this is a part of our brain that we're constantly having to fight against, it is being mindful of that you are prone to this, that it can happen. And so that can help if you are actively thinking about that all the time, right?
Or at least have it in the back of your brain.
Right.
That aggression is something that's an evolutionary thing and is not your fault. And I think a lot of the problem is that we want to throw, oh, you guys can't do that, right? Instead of being like, hey, man, it's okay. Don't worry about it, right? And I think it's, again, just finding that empathy for the situation that, a lot of cases, young men just don't have that self-control to be able to control those evolutionary tendencies that are in the back of their head telling them to go punch something, right?
It's something that I fight against too, and it's something that I, for years, and it's certainly affected previous relationships where, like in my 20s, any little thing could just set me off in a relationship. And now I don't get mad at insignificant things anymore. Like, it's very hard for me to get upset about somebody, not putting the cap on their toothpaste, or some stupid insignificant, right? That could just set you off in a relationship because your partner has weird habits, right? So I had to work a lot of years of just saying to myself, this is not worth it. It's not worth getting this upset over, because it would really stress me out. And it's just a constant work in progress. I'm not perfect. I mean, I blew up on this. I mean, I'm going to cut most of that out, but you know, I blew up at the beginning of this podcast here, and I think the heat's also getting to me too. And I really don't want to be wearing this leather jacket right now.
See, but that's again, like, that's where we are in this conversation. And again, my back pfeifen psyched got in the way of, right? Like, sometimes we just have that my back pfeifen psyched. I think that's it. I don't even, right? That's the worst German ever heard. So I apologize to any German listeners out there. But that word, I need to find the proper, anyone who can send us the proper pronunciation for that. I mean, that just is a word that we need to back pfeifen.
But they actually have a word for it, which is amazing.
For an adjective describing a face that badly needs punching. And it's so amazing. Like, just trust the Germans to find a word for just that sense of something that you just can't. There's just no words in our language for just wanting to punch someone in the face, right? Like, you just have it's like the Japanese word for your mouth being lonely, and so you're eating, right? It's the same kind of idea where you just don't have those kind of words for this sometimes, right? And so we need to find outside sources.
Do the Germans have a word for wanting to punch your own face? Because sometimes I feel like I want to punch myself.
I'm sure they phrase it more as like running your face into a brick wall or something, but yeah, I'm sure they've probably got some sort of form of venom. Yeah, it seems like something that they would have tried to express in a
dealing with
most of their words sound like long statements anyway, so
right. Yeah, I mean, dealing with, or how do you deal with, you know, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, right? That's difficult because we evolve so very slowly, and there are ancient parts of our own brain too that is responsible for a lot of our behavior, right? And that's really difficult to. It's like a constant battle, right? That you have to work against.
Well, and is it something that could necessarily even be evolved out, if that makes sense, right? Because arguably aggression is one of just our base instincts, right? It's kind of our animalistic side, right? We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to defend our territory. We are still territorial animals at the end of the day, right? So arguably, I think it's something that can't go away.
Well,
I don't know what you guys think of that.
We also don't really talk about when that is actually good, right? Yeah. We don't really talk about getting violent in general has a negative connotation, right? But when is getting violent appropriate? Well, maybe if someone's attacking your child, you might have to defend yourself, and so violence might be necessary, right?
And that's, I always try to go back to the proper application of force.
Right. Pure self-preservation.
Right. Like, there are times when the use of force is unfortunately necessary and the only way that you will be able to preserve your life at times. Right. But again, it's the proper use of that force that we need to get around. Right. And by even just adding that layer to the conversation, now we at least have to have that conversation about how much force is too much. Is killing a person just too much force to apply to the situation at hand? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of this, you know, again, if we understand that aggression is A, part of our nature, and B, something that has been evolved into us.
Yes.
Right. We also have the power to evolve out of it. A lot of what we talk about on the podcast here is about how our evolution now has outstripped the genetic component of it. And how now this thing of talking to each other, having these conversations with each other about these aggressive tendencies that we might be able to actually do something about will change our evolution faster than a million years worth of punching ever could. Hey? And so that's, again, part of why we do this thing here, is just because these conversations are actually making a difference in actually shifting our evolution away from a lot of these base instincts that tend to hold us back. Again, there's proper applications for these things, but it's, again, determining what those are so that as a society we can say, no, that was too much.
But what if someone just has a face that's in need of a good punching?
But that sometimes is a proper application of the force, right? Unfortunately, sometimes we're in a situation where it feels like the only way you're ever going to get through to that person is, right? And so that back pfeifen psyched really becomes, right, a real, just like, you know, what other solution do you have for literally, you know, when Alex was talking about how, you know, the little things don't get to him anymore. I just wanted to blurt out, Alex, fuck you. Right? Because that's the problem where we are right now, where a lot of our, social interactions devolve to just a fuck you kind of mentality. And so how do you deal with that without just wanting to backfife and psych the hell out of them, right?
Well, you see that in politics all the time, right? And it just gets worse and worse and worse as the years go by, right? You see this anger, you see this fuck you attitude, and nobody wants to talk to each other. No one wants to communicate properly anymore, right? And have reasonable discourse.
Because apparently we've been taught that punching each other is an acceptable method. And I think that leads to a lot of this. That's where social media has its thing, right? Where trolls are allowed to do this, because apparently that has been accepted as a method of dealing with these things.
And right? also metaphorically saying fuck you, and like two people just saying fuck you to each other is like they're metaphorically punching each other. That just shuts everything down. You cannot have discourse.
Yeah. And that's the
I kind of think it's like our monkey mind winning. It's kind of how I look at it, right? If you look at kind of the breakdown of being able to think for yourself, which is arguably what's been happening with our overload of information, right? We've kind of lost this ability to self-regulate and to question why we're doing things. So the monkey mind is winning. Right. And so you see an increase in this aggression.
Yeah. And you can just see, like, I mean, how many times do you ever witness two people in an argument and they're both saying fuck you and the other one's trying to top the other one? It's like, fuck you.
Fuck you more.
Fuck me. Fuck you. Fuck you.
Okay, and this is our funny faces bit for it. I said just telling each other to fuck you.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's exactly it, right? Like, and then it just becomes a fuck you contest. And how does anything ever get done that way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really hope my neighbor doesn't knock on my door after hearing me yell saying, fuck you. We're like, what's going on over there? I got to call the cops.
The cops show up at Alex's place.
It's when you start throwing things around. That's right. I mean, that's when the
I'm scaring my cat
gets
also. My cat's very scared when I yell.
That's it. Throw the microphone at the camera.
Yeah. Is he yelling at me? What's going on?
What is happening? Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, again, it's more just being aware of the situation, right? If you're not aware that the reason that you feel those aggressive tendencies is because that was evolved into us, then again, you would just blame yourself for it, and there would be a fault kind of situation where you now have this loop of, well, that just must be me, and I guess I'm just going to start punching things.
Well, they try they try to teach you, or at least give you the tools to manage your own temper when you go to anger management classes, but I mean, I don't think it should even get to that point, right? Like, we should have, there's a little bit of, I just remember in elementary and high school, there's a little bit of that with like coaching, talking about peer pressure and how do you deal with your feelings and all that sort of stuff. But there probably isn't enough of that. We're not probably taught enough of that at a young age. We're not given the right tools in order to say, hey, these are feelings that you're going to have, and violence rarely does solve things. So it's not something that
we're taught just don't hit. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not why you feel you need to do this.
Yeah. Well, let alone in aggression empathy course, right? Like, how do you deal with someone who is just showing you aggression for no reason, right? Like, how do we bridge this gap? And I think a lot of this, we need to have these kind of mediating, conversations of, why do you feel this way? How can we get around this, right? Like, how do we bring this situation down so that you don't feel that the only recourse that you have is to start throwing punches?
I'll tell you how we bridge the gap. We'll bridge it with my fist.
Which has been our answer for 100,000, a million years or so, right? And just, I would posit the theory that there might be a better way.
There is a better way.
I'm just throwing this out there, and maybe I'm the first one to ever think about this, but maybe, right? Maybe we just didn't have to punch each other or kill each other or do any of this random bullshit to each other. Maybe we could just let it all go, and you'd realize that, oh, wait a minute, right? I didn't need to, that was really just making me all just inside. Oh, well, gee, that's crazy talk.
That also takes emotional maturity, which is lacking in a lot of people that are aggressive, right?
Well, and that's exactly the thing, right? Like, again, it's the awareness.
Yeah.
you know, and hopefully just by having some awareness of these little things inside of our head, that monkey inside of you that always wants to drive your reactions, right?
Why is it always
We also need
to
to talk about the reward system involved, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
a lot of people, when
Absolutely.
they're aggressive and they're yelling, and they get what they want,
Yep.
right? So it's a feedback loop for sure.
Well, and you know what doesn't help too is that, again, this goes back to that stupid ancient part of our brains. Like, why is it that when two people, you see this in high school, right? When two people get into a fight, a crowd forms around them, and then everyone in the crowd is like, "Yeah, fucking kick him in the face!" Like, it just becomes this feeding frenzy of violence, and it's just it's part. You start to see that part of our humanity just comes out, and it's just like that's just not right. Like, this is just
that's the animal
bunch of
winning
fucking
again.
cave people here. Like, we're better than that.
Well, and that's two words keep ringing through my head over the past couple minutes here, and that's been gratification cycle, right? Where part of our brain gets gratification from that. And so then the problem with that is that the hit you get inside your brain from that kind of response is short-lived. Hey, but it's also an addictive cycle that makes your brain crave more. And so those short-lived boops, right, are unfortunately one of those problems where, you know, now your brain wants more of those. And so the next time you see that fight, your first reaction is to go back to that cycle of, we want to get that boop, right? Yeah. Instead of, how do I break up this situation?
Right.
You know, and I think that's part of what we need to get past, is recognizing that, again, this aggression is leading to an addiction cycle of wanting more aggression.
Yeah.
Right. And again, the problem is, you know, addiction being a form of learning, and just a form of learning that your brain really likes. Right. We have evolved to be throwing punches and taking punches. And unfortunately, part of our brain considers that to be this gratification cycle. So throwing a punch makes you it makes your brain go boop for that second, and then unfortunately you have to start throwing more punches to keep getting that boop. Okay.
Yeah, and there's no good easy answer for this. I just need to. I think we need to do better. You know, when it comes to education at a young age, I think we need to do better about making people. And I don't know if it's it's just an overall larger philosophical discussion. There needs to be like a dedicated class where we talk about life skills and how to deal with these feelings, and recognizing and actually first identifying these parts of our brains, right? So that we can actually be prepared for when that happens. We recognize it and go, oh yeah, there's that thing that's coming back again, and I gotta, you know.
And that's been the part lacking from the conversation up until now, is why, right? Like, we've been bashing our heads against, well, this is just what we're doing for a million years. And we finally have the technology to actually be able to crack open our skulls and say, yeah, but why are you doing that? I don't know. Right. And actually be able to track a brain and say, why is it doing that? Well, it's leading your brain neurologically through this channel into this channel and through this part of the brain that leads you to these decisions. Right. And again, it used to be just, we thought it was fucking demons inside your head before that would make you do this stupid bullshit. And they were always so angry all the time. And now we know that, no, that's just a function of our brain. You don't have to be blamed for it. It's not an original sin kind of problem.
Right.
Hey?
Yes.
You know, it is, but it's one of those things that you're not at fault for, and therefore you have control over the implementation of.
Absolutely.
Right. I like to say bullies are made. Right. Bullies aren't born. Right. We make bullies by allowing these things to happen, by giving that gratification cycle. Right. Instead of, again, as a society, standing up and going, hey, buddy, it's OK. Don't worry about it. We got you. And giving out hugs instead of punches.
It's a little more challenging and a nuanced problem, though, too, when that person that is the bully, who's obviously learning it from someone, is probably in an abusive family.
Yep.
Maybe their father's an alcoholic, and maybe they get beat on too. So they feel like the only way they feel empowered is to make somebody else feel smaller.
Absolutely.
And so, that's really tough in a public school environment too, because resources are limited. You don't have that much time to spend individually with kids to figure out what's going on in their lives either, right? So that's a challenge.
But that's, again, a challenge that we could fix, and again, it feels like something that if you leave that child alone in that situation, what do you expect?
Yeah, but how? Right? Yeah, it's easier said than done. But how
if you were to create social outlets so that they didn't have to be necessarily in that situation, or that they knew that there was someone that they could talk to when this kind of stuff was going down, let alone that they knew that there was someone who might be able to talk to the father or carry this situation on. The problem here is that, again, we leave these people in the dirt. We let them just go do their thing, and if they happen to be rolling around in it, we just let them do it, instead of helping them up and treating them as if they were a human being. That if I were rolling around in the dirt going, I would hope that somebody would just stop and say, hey, are you okay, bud?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
I think teaching people and children, especially from a young age, on how to properly express themselves.
Exactly.
Because that's something that is not taught in schools. That's, you kind of learn it.
That's
Some
right.
of us never learn it along the way, right? So if that's where we're starting from, then maybe it wouldn't get to this level.
Well, yeah, exactly. You're right. And maybe if there are any bullies out there at a young age, maybe by having these courses where you teach everybody, maybe we can start to actually, change their mindset, right? At least have them, or at least open up their minds to that way of thinking, of recognizing those things.
Well, yeah, if you're a bully and it's because you're going through hard stuff, right? And this is your outlet for doing it. Yep. Well, if you're taught to properly express, oh, I'm hurting, right? Without doing it in this physical way.
Yeah. And then you could then take that home to your father who is hurting. And that is why he is lashing out, and he feels caught in this cycle of, and there's no way to get out of it. This is just what I'm doing, right? Yeah. You could then change this generationally, where we all recognize that, hey, we've made some mistakes, but we can grow from that. And I don't blame you for it, because that's where we were. And we just have the choice of moving forward now.
That's right.
And just, again, that place of empathy that we've all been there. We've all had that crossroads in our life where we had the choice of speaking and being, empathetic to the other person, or just throwing a fucking punch in their face. Backpfeifen gesagt. I'm going to get it right eventually.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you sit down with your abusive father and you just, have some empathy, and you sit down, you lovingly talk to him, and then whip out your belt and beat him senseless.
Right? And that's, again, like the idea.
Oh, sorry, was the mic on? That was actually that was my inner voice. I apologize.
I've recorded this, and I'm going to play this for your dad.
I would never. Hey, my dad's a good guy. No issues there.
Uncomfortable silence. All right. I was going to, my dad.
Well, he's in the other room, so I got to be careful.
If he's watching this, I'd love for him to
saying.
call every once in a while. That'd be great, but we don't get that. So,
no.
So I'm glad your dad is awesome.
Yeah, no, he really is. He really is. I mean that sincerely. But yeah, you're right. It absolutely is. It needs to be taught at a younger age. Like you said, Aaron, bullies are made. You aren't just born like this, unless there's some other deeper psychological, that's
absolutely.
That's something else
There's
entirely.
Exceptions to that rule, for sure.
Exactly.
Right?
There are exceptions to that. We're not talking about that. We're just talking on average, the average person. This is learned behavior, right?
Yeah. And again, the most of the anger and fear is coming from a place of hurt. If you get right down to most of this, if you really think about what makes you angry, it's probably some place of somebody hurt you before.
Right.
And this has been a reaction to that's just continued on through your life. That became crystallized in your early brain.
Well, I mean,
and you've just carried that reaction through.
Perfect example. I mean, when we talked about this on another episode about randomized fear too, about your personal story too, with the, struggles with your with the friendship that you had with somebody for a very long time and realizing that it wasn't actually the friendship that you thought it was, right? And so you were processing these feelings and trying to figure out what to do with it, right? And that's, but also part of the process too is actually, being able to sit down and process this stuff. Because if we're just, if you're just letting this stuff build up inside, and it's just like you're going to explode at some point too. Like you have to be able to process your own thoughts.
Well, and that's always been my process
in a
anyway.
healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Process
that's
in a healthy way.
If I let it loop inside my head, it becomes unhealthy very quickly.
Right? Well, and anger and aggression is an unhealthy way to process. It's an easy way to process, right? Like we talk about a lot. Our brains take the path of least resistance. So anger happens to be that, right? It's a good way to just get it out there, right? But it doesn't actually solve anything. It still keeps coming back.
Well, and that's where, again, I'm trying to figure out, evolutionarily, there's a reason that we have kept this around. And I'm just trying to think of, like our brains tend to respond to the negative chemicals more than the positive ones, right? So receiving praise from someone only makes up for about, it's like a 10-to-1 ratio where if you get 10 negative comments, right, it's the equivalent of one praise or something, or one anyway.
Around.
Yeah, other way around. Yes, where negative chemicals are just so much more. They react inside our brain so much more because when you burn your hand on something, your brain has to tell you to not do that ever again.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of our reactions socially build on the same system.
And that makes sense back in caveman days, right? Like you needed to be able to respond to threats very, very quickly.
Exactly. And that's where, again, it's a matter of now if we could train people and just teach that little bit of empathy that we're all going through a struggle. And if we just give each other a hug every now and again, right, you would find that bully might be less of a bully again, right? Like if that guy going to throw a punch at you, if you just, met him with a hug and just like a heartfelt, just like, hey, buddy, it's okay, right? That, how much of this might be able to resolve earlier then, Yeah. And I get, hey, that's really simple. Just give the guy a hug, right? But I mean, it's even on a metaphorical level, right? Like, again, just that sense of empathy, right? Like just taking that step back from the situation of backpfeifen Gesicht. Oh, no, wait, what? Right? And maybe there's an alternative to just punching people in the face.
Well, there's always an alternative. There's always a choice.
No.
Right. It's punching or nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's all I got.
Well,
that response there summed up our relationship perfectly up until this. Yes, that is usually shut up. Go away.
Well, the therapy.
Now you have a word
That's
to
how
explain.
these all end.
Exactly. Yeah.
The therapy session. The therapy session will have to continue another time. Clearly, there's more work to be done with all of us here. So, especially me. So.
And it's not necessarily just punching people in the face, I guess.
That's exactly right. That's the moral of the story.
Well, I do like to say you generally can't make people smarter by punching them in the face. It's just one of those crazy things, eh? I mean,
yeah, imagine that, right?
I know.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks very much for watching on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure you do that. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursdays. If there's a topic suggestion you have, please drop it in the comments below. If you would prefer the audio-only version of that show, you can do that by subscribing in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Spotify, all available platforms. We're on social media at the Subvert Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We also have a website, thesubvertpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the blog and hit the contact button if you want to send us any feedback via email. That's all the time we have for this week. But before you go, just remember that we're all fucked up. So let's be fucked up together.